Alchemy, The Secret of Immortality finally revealed. This book is copyright 2008 by Årt Kúñkīñ. However, the copyright holder does not object to the purchase or reprinting and distributing 10 free copies of this ebook to close friends so that this information becomes widely accessible. However, only registered purchasers will receive important research updates. So, please, if you have not purchased this book yourself, please go to Null, register yourself and pay the small amount requested there for this extraordinarily valuable information. Then you will Årt Kúñkīñ Alchemy, The Secret of Immortality, how to make the Philosopher's Stone in your kitchen lab and have a healthy life for a very, very long time. The Secret of Immortality finally revealed. Alchemy, The Secret of Immortality finally revealed. This book is dedicated to all the men, women and children who have wanted health, happiness and physical immortality during the last 200,000 years but were frustrated by death. Alchemy, The Secret of Immortality finally revealed. Important note: January 18, 2008. This is an uncorrected and incomplete manuscript edition of this book as of this date. It is being distributed to a few interested people because of my desire, as indicated in the introduction, to circulate the practical information in Book 1 about making the Philosopher's Stone as soon as possible. In coming weeks I will be sending updated editions of this manuscript to all people on my mailing list at no additional charge until the final edition becomes available. Please note the edition date in your possession. My website will show the most current date and delete all outdated copies. If you have received a complimentary copy of this book, and, consequently, are not in my database of purchasers, but want to receive research newsletters from me as well as the updated manuscripts, please fill out the PayPal form on my website so you will be on my mailing list. Thank you. I look forward to being your friend and companion in this research and activities to improve the world for many, many years to come. Sincerely, Årt Kúñkīñ. Table of Contents. Introduction. Welcome to this practical manual. Book 1, How to Easily Make an Herbal Stone for Adding Healthy Years to Your Life. Chapter 1, What are the 2 goals of alchemy? 10. Chapter 2, Why alchemy seems to be a pseudoscience. 11. Chapter 3, What is the secret fire needed to make the Philosopher's Stone? 14. Chapter 4, Why the Philosopher's Stone can slow or stop your aging. 23. Chapter 5, Where and how can you obtain the secret fire? 36. Chapter 6, How to make a stone. How to build your kitchen laboratory. 35. Chapter 7, How to use your stone safely. 41. Chapter 8, 4 stones, herbal, animal, mineral and human. 48. Chapter 9, Ordinary ways to find friends to help you make a stone. 56. Book 2, Possible ways to make a stone for elemental transmutations. Chapter 10, Transmutations I have done in my kitchen lab. 57. Chapter 11, U.S. Army researchers verify Kervran's biological transmutations. Chapter 12, Is the mineral stone possibly a super heavy element? Book 3, Yogas to turn yourself into Eagle D. Chapter 13, The Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches conscious reincarnation. 59. Chapter 14, Hebrew Kabbalah and Buddhist Abhidhamma, Methods for Enlightenment. Chapter 15, Hindu Kundalini and Chinese Taoism, Sexual Yogas to Increase Energy. Chapter 16, Sexual Yoga and Alchemy in the Old Testament. Chapter 17, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, Modeling an Alchemist. Book 4, Some Notes on the History of Alchemy. Chapter 18, The Secret Origins of Alchemy in Sumeria. 59. Chapter 19, Experiments we made to find the secret fire, not this, not that. 60. Chapter 20, Immortal Vampires and Constructed Frankenstein. 65. Chapter 21, Gnostics, Cathars, Templars, Freemasons and Rosicrucians. Chapter 22, Alchemy in Salt Lake City, Frater Albertus and Israel Regardi. Chapter 23, Alchemy at Hogwarts, Nicholas Flamel and Harry Potter. Chapter 24, The Denial of Death, Gilgamesh, Jung and Post-Freudianism. Chapter 25, Zanoni and Saint Germain, Famous Legends about Immortals. Chapter 26, How Immortals Can Improve the World. Alchemy, The Secret of Immortality finally revealed. Book 5, Why Humans Want to Become Immortal. Introduction. Welcome to this practical manual. Null. I believe that what you are about to read here will help you extend your life by many, many healthy years. Book 1 of this ebook is a short and practical manual to do so. This section gives you all the information you will need to easily and inexpensively make the legendary Philosopher's Stone I am using for life extension myself. This is not a finished project. It is still a research project. I do not claim to know all the answers and, therefore, am calling upon my readers to help me discover more of the truth. I am certain that the stone I am teaching you to make can be improved. However, I do believe that the new approach to the ancient science of alchemy I am recommending is the road to be taken and developed. It is logical, scientific and is backed by the experiential proof of large numbers of people who in the course of their life have benefited from accidental and partial contact with the stone as it appears in nature. There is scientific proof of this in this manuscript. I want to underline this point. The stone is in nature and in all living bodies. The alchemical scientist is an artist simply taking a natural principle, purifying the substances in which it naturally appears and applying it in a conscious way so that the same mechanism giving us life today for 70 or 80 years will allow us to live for 200 years or 1,000 years or more depending on circumstance. I feel this truth in my heart and in the observations I make each day of how the stone I have made is improving my physical body and emotional outlook. The truth about the stone is that it is already in us, it is already responsible for our life, but there is not enough of it in our body to make us immortal. Book 1 is the hearty of this ebook. It is followed by 4 other iBooky sections. This structure is designed to keep separate the practical information given in Book 1 from the theories, history and supplemental information presented in Books 2 through 5 that may be of less importance to you at present. My main interest in studying alchemy has been to discover if the alchemical stone can extend life, not in making gold. Therefore I have reserved for Book 2 my discussion for making a stone that can transmute metals. In this first edition, Books 2 to 5 are obviously undeveloped. This has allowed me to publish the practical information in the Book 1 manual before all the research is completed. New research and more detail will be published in the newsletter that will be periodically sent to all purchasers of this book, in updated editions of this ebook that will be provided free to all purchasers of this first edition and eventually compiled into a hardcover edition. You do not need to be a rocket scientist to make a useful philosopher's stone. You can easily do this in your own kitchen. The stone we describe here can be made very rapidly by a person without laboratory experience and at very little cost. Furthermore, you do not have to do this work alone. I tell you how to find friends who will help you find the necessary materials and equipment. You can even do the actual work with these friends and share results. In Book 3 you will also learn of a long-known method for psychically getting information from alchemists of other ages. I have no plans now or for the future to manufacture and sell a medicinal stone to anyone. One reason for this is that I have no desire to get into an expensive and time-consuming legal struggle with the American Medical Association or with the Federal Food and Drug Administration. I recommend that you also do alchemy. The secret of immortality finally revealed. My intention here is simply to tell as many people as possible where to get and how to process the materials to make the legendary alchemical stone for themselves. If more people live longer, perhaps we humans will develop the maturity to end the violence and criminalities and stupidities that threaten our survival today. Null. To the best of my knowledge there is no other book providing these simple and clear instructions, although there are more than 4,000 books on alchemy available in the English language. I know this because in the last 30 years I have accumulated and studied over 1,000 of the most important books on this subject. I have also performed many of the laboratory procedures described in these books and have experienced the frustration that can come from work without results. The 3 stones. The alchemical literature speaks of 3 kinds of stones: mineral, herbal, and animal. There are also hints that some alchemists believe it is useful to speak of a 4th stone, a human stone. Chapter 6 of Book 1 gives detailed instructions for making the particular form of herbal stone I have been ingesting for almost 2 years. I have waited this time before publishing my findings because I decided long ago that I would evaluate the results on and in my own body before referring the process to others. In this book I mention several procedures that can be used to make herbal and animal stones and human stones for regeneration of the human body. However, the production of these other stones, including the so-called human stone, requires much more lab equipment, considerably more time to perfect, as well as a greater knowledge of chemistry and laboratory procedure than the instructions given here in Book 1. That is why I recommend that you first make the herbal stone described in Book 1, begin your own rejuvenation with this simple philosopher's stone, and then you will have the time to make and try improved stones. I want to emphasize that I believe there is more than one way to make a useful alchemical stone for increasing your lifespan. Furthermore, a stone made in one way may be more efficient than one made differently. While the method I teach here is the quickest and most inexpensive way to make a stone that I know, other methods may be more functional. That is why I am proposing in Chapter 9 that readers of this book collaborate with me and other readers to continue the research. All the stones I mention slow or stop the aging process through the same basic principle, through the application of the same energizing secret fire to the human body. In Chapter 8 I suggest that certain forms of the animal stone may be more compatible with the human body than a plant substance and, therefore, more effective as a life extender. However, any one of the animal stones mentioned will also take more time and equipment than the simple herbal stone detailed in Book 1. Therefore start your rejuvenation with this herbal stone. Incidentally, The alchemical tradition in describing the end product as acetone refers both to solids that look like a stone or to liquid acetone, some more properly called elixirs. In either case, the same secret fire is used to energize the human body for the purpose of slowing or stopping aging. Alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed. I have been using my herbal acetone for more than a year. I have been ingesting the herbal acetone described in Book 1 throughout 2006 and 2007 with no negative results and several positive ones. Of course, it is too early to say definitively that this acetone will help me live for an extended period of time or how long. However, there are definite signs of an increased life force in my body. For example, my hair is growing at twice its normal rate. I normally need a haircut every month, but now I have to have my hair trimmed twice a month to not look shaggy. My fingernails and toenails are also growing at a markedly increased rate. And my sexual energy has markedly increased. Traditional alchemical literature specifically states that after ingesting the acetone one's hair, nails and teeth fall out and, that then, all three grow back again in a more healthy state than before. However, as I shall show in Chapter 3, given the nature of the stone I am using, this description would be actually characteristic of an overdose. The growth of hair, nails and energy I have experienced with the careful dosage I am using indicates that this stone is similar to the ones reported by the few alchemists who succeeded in making acetone. I strongly recommend that if you do decide to make and ingest this acetone, you carefully experiment at first with very low dosages. I have been advised by lawyers that if you, the reader, have the least doubt about the stone as described here or experience any discomfort with the materials used to make and constitute the acetone, you should immediately consult with a licensed physician. I am not a licensed doctor, so I cannot and do not claim that the stone will cure any physical problem. I certainly cannot guarantee that you will definitely live a healthy life for hundreds of years or experience cures of any illness you are experiencing. However, I have been researching in the field of alchemy for almost 30 years now and in the biological sciences for longer. Based on this experience, I do personally believe that this acetone can extend one's physical life indefinitely. There are reasons why humans age. In Chapter 4 I discuss the scientific reasons why I believe that the acetone I describe here will logically slow and stop that aging process. In Book 3 I write of the inner alchemy that can supplement and strengthen the results that the philosopher's stone provides. I do believe that this stone can extend life indefinitely. Frankly, I have decided to experiment with and ingest this acetone because I will be 80 years old in March of 2008 and cannot wait any longer for someone else to prove the reliability of a method of rejuvenation. I am healthy and vigorous for a person of my age, but statistically I cannot expect to have many more years of healthy life remaining. So far my gamble of ingesting the acetone that I have made is paying off. I look younger, feel younger and act younger than most persons my age. If you are a younger person, there is no reason why you should not read this book now. Make sure you know how to make the stone for yourself and then wait to see what experience others are having with this acetone before using it yourself. Our research reports we plan to send to all purchasers of this book at no additional charge will tell you about the experiences that readers are having with the acetone. And if you are an older person, you have a life and death decision to make about the information in this book, just as I have made. If you are a purchaser of this book and have registered your name and email address on the website, you will get periodic updates from me about new research and new findings. This will also give me the opportunity to flesh out the chapters of this ebook that have necessarily been left sketchy because of my desire to quickly publish the contents of Book 1. If you do not start to receive these Alchemy, the Secret of Immortality Finally Revealed again, Book 1 is the practical manual for making the stone. Since Book 1 is a practical manual, I have included in it only as much history and theory as absolutely necessary for a complete novice to understand the logic of the step-by-step instructions for making the acetone. I have been able to keep this practical part of this ebook brief only by referring both the novice and the experienced experimenter who want elaborations of historical and/or theoretical issues to chapters in the other sections of this ebook. For example, in Book 1 I start by defining the goals of alchemy and there provide the barest of historical information so the novice will have a beginning point. However, when in Chapter 3 I specify the secret fire mineral I use in the production of the acetone, this raises the issue of how the use of this mineral has been kept secret for thousands of years. This, in turn, raises new questions about the historical origins of alchemy, and all these important questions are finally taken up in Book 4, where I present some notes on the history of alchemy. I ask the reader's forgiveness for any difficulties you may encounter in reading this book that results from this ordering of the material. I am simply aiming to keep the integrity of Book 1 as a practical manual that is as brief as possible. Book 2 deals with the theory and practice of transmutation. It is only in Book 2 that I discuss how the same secret fire used to energize the longevity stone can possibly accomplish metallic transmutations. It is also in this book that I discuss the novel theories of one of my mentor friends about the role of super heavy elements in accomplishing transmutation. In other chapters of Book 2 I present information about the elemental transmutations I accomplished in 1980 by replicating some of the work of Louis Kerverin described in his book, Biological Transmutations. I circumflex the Gnosis magazine interview available at my website about this work but in a more condensed version than I present here. The Kerverin work has also been replicated by researchers for the U.S. Army. I plan to put the actual U.S. Army report on my website. This is a clear confirmation that we can get to the same desired place by many paths. Book 3 deals with transmutation and evolution of the human being. The alchemical tradition deals with more than longevity and the transmutation of metals. Longevity is desirable only if the added years are filled with health and happiness. However, when discussing inner alchemy and the inner transmutations that can lead to a successful life, most of the written material available up to now focuses almost exclusively on such Western traditions as magic, mystic Christianity, Jewish Kabbalah, Jungian psychology and other post-Freudian psychologies. However, there is a vast knowledge of inner alchemy in Buddhism, Taoism and the martial arts of the East. This is because fragments of alchemical knowledge did not only move into Egypt, Greece, the Mid-East, Europe and finally the United States from its original ancient source but into Tibet, China, Korea, and India. As happened with the dispersal and mystification of laboratory alchemy in both East and West, the theory and practice of inner alchemy also became so fragmented that it is difficult to acquire an overview of it. Since the 1950s the present author has been in a unique position to integrate into the alchemical tradition alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed Taoist sexual alchemy and the philosophy underlying the martial arts. Although the focus of this ebook is making a physical stone for life extension and not inner alchemy, in Book 3 I do suggest to readers some of the best techniques for personal development I know of to use while beginning to ingest the S-tone. While space and time only permits a brief overview here, enough is presented for the reader to begin experimentation in his or her fíñälly laboratory. These meditational and psychological techniques will be expanded in the newsletter the purchaser of this ebook will be sent as well as in other future writings, lectures and seminars. I particularly want to call your attention to the chapter on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Here I introduce some of the meditational techniques that I have found especially useful in aligning my inner being with the principles of laboratory alchemy and the objectives of living a long, happy, productive, healthy and fulfilling life. In writing this chapter I have been a bit wordier than I anticipated being for an ebook devoted to the physical stone, but please indulge me. There are several audiences I am addressing. One is the relatively small group of laboratory alchemists who up to now may not have thought much about Tibet or Tibetan Buddhism or any inner work in relation to alchemy. However, I have concluded that at least a section of Tibetan Buddhism is based on the principles of alchemy and laboratory alchemists should know this. Then there is a second audience of people who are interested in inner alchemy and meditation as well as laboratory alchemy. And a third group who are interested in meditation but haven't been concerned with alchemy in any of its forms. These two groups will benefit from understanding that there is an alchemical medicine they can take to help accomplish their inner goals. Then there is a fourth, larger group who don't meditate and have never picked up a test tube. This group is living day to day, overcoming problems as they occur and trying to be as happy as possible. I hope that this ebook will provide a challenging introduction for this man and woman of the general public about methods to defeat the Grim Reaper, the ultimate problem for all of us humans. In Book 3 I also give some hints about various neuroscience discoveries about the human brain that I have found valuable while considering what I want my own life to be like for the next 200 years and more. Book 4 presents notes on the history of alchemy. Chapter 18 of Book 4 presents a new theory about the ancient origins of the alchemical tradition that will further clarify our presentation of the secret fire in this book. This will explain how the essence of alchemy has been kept secret for so long and why alchemy has been considered a pseudoscience. Also, no one has written an adequate history of Frater Albertus, my own teacher of alchemy in Salt Lake City and his Paracelsus Research Society, his Paracelsus College and his Paralab manufacturer of alchemical medicinal tinctures. Having been editor of Essentia, the magazine of Paracelsus College, and having completed the 7-year course there when I lived in Salt Lake City, I have accumulated a library of laboratory notes from various classes as well as personal contacts sufficient to begin this historical project. I want to stress that while the class work at PRS did not lead to making the S-tone, all of the teachings made available there have proven valuable to me. Even some of the seemingly failed experiments taught at PRS may prove to be useful later on. In chapters 19 and 21 we take a few modest steps in presenting the story of alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed ebook edition. Whatever steps I take in this historical direction will be very, very small ones. In Chapter 22 of Book 4 I also briefly discuss the work of alchemist Nicholas Flamel in the 14th century and how J.K. Rowling presented Flamel in her magnificent series of Harry Potter novels. I believe that the millions of young people who have read one or more of her 7 books in recent years have been introduced to alchemy in a way that can usefully be deepened for the benefit of society. If you know readers of the Harry Potter books, please do tell them about this ebook. Book 5, The Possible Impact of Increased Longevity on Individuals and Society. If the new insights into alchemy openly presented here to the general public results in extended life for many people and a quicker and greater increase in population than presently expected, the social and economic structures of our society will be greatly stressed, to say the least. If people live for hundreds of years instead of 70 or 80 as at present, there will be enormous effects on family structure, personal relationships, cities, property ownership, governments, technology, etc. If great quantities of gold were suddenly available through alchemical transmutation from lesser valued metals, the financial systems of the world would be disrupted. And what would happen to the psychology of individuals if the fear of death was removed or lessened? Would we be able to better move toward the abolition of war and a decrease in criminal violence, personal depression and family dysfunction? For thousands of years alchemists have said potential social disruption was one of the reasons why they kept their knowledge secret. But what really would happen if the alchemical legend suddenly turned out to be a true science, as I believe? I end our book on this note, followed by reproductions of some documents that bear on the new theories presented in this text. Alchemy, The Secret of Immortality finally revealed. Book 1, The Practical Secret of Alchemy revealed. Chapter 1, What is Alchemy? Alchemy claims it is possible to formulate a substance, usually described as a acetone but sometimes as a liquid elixir, that is said to accomplish 2 quite different and remarkable results. The first is to transmute one elemental metal into another. The second use of the stone is to lengthen human life by hundreds or even thousands of years. However, up to now these 2 goals have been the content of fairy tale legends and seemingly not proven in actual history. Nevertheless, the goals of alchemy have been so desirable, so seemingly logical of achievement, that some of the greatest minds in human history from Aristotle to Newton have been engaged in alchemical research. In my own research into alchemy I have been puzzled for many years how one substance, one acetone could possibly transform metals and also have a beneficial effect on the human body. In this book I give a logical, scientific and practical answer to this alchemical riddle based on my own almost 30 years of experimentation, failures, diversions and successes in my laboratory. All the literature of alchemy is vast and confusing. There are many recipe books but none of the recipes are complete enough to result in actual longevity or transmutations. Many of the recipes seem to involve magic and the willpower of the would-be alchemist rather than straightforward scientific procedures. There is also a tradition of presenting alchemy through symbols, metaphors and artistic depictions of processes rather than scientific and precise descriptions of materials and procedures. Now that we have computers and access to internet libraries of the thousands of books written about alchemy, the confusion about what ancient alchemists really accomplished seems to have deepened rather than been clarified. Furthermore, the very origins of alchemy are hidden in history. Alchemy is said by some to have originated in ancient Egypt thousands of years ago. The concepts of alchemy also appear in ancient China, Taoism, India, and the philosophers of ancient Greece. Alchemy was preserved in Arab countries during the European Dark Ages and, eventually, was transmitted to Europe and the American colonies prior to 1776. Alchemists in different parts of the world have formulated different recipes and, in many cases, seem to be talking about different procedures. Hundreds of different names were given to the philosopher's stone. Nevertheless, I will demonstrate in this book that alchemy is a genuine lost science based on procedures that can be replicated in simple laboratories. Alchemy is not a fairy tale. With an easily acquired ability to apply this science we can improve our lives and the world in which we live. Alchemy, The Secret of Immortality finally revealed. Chapter 2, Why 99.99% of would-be alchemists have failed to make the philosopher's stone. The tradition of alchemy claims that the stone can be made from many natural substances. This tradition, however, also states that there is only one material to be found in nature, something considered to be evil, a circumflex, something normally discarded, something containing a secret fire from which the stone can easily be made. There are discussions of wet ways and dry ways, slow ways and rapid ways, but some necessary information has always been concealed. In this manual I not only reveal the name of this necessary secret fire but explain how to obtain and process it without much effort. The great majority of the 4,000 or so books about alchemy in the English language only give coded pseudonyms for the name of the prima materia, the first matter, or for the important secret fire that energizes the alchemical process. This inevitably confuses the student about the one substance that is really involved at the core of the alchemical process. The alchemical authors give varying reasons for this concealment. Some claim that they were sworn to secrecy when they were given this information by a mentor. Others claim the knowledge is the proprietary knowledge of one or another secret society to which they belong and to whom they have pledged secrecy. Some claim that this secret is so closely held because the very fabric of society would be destroyed if humans could become immortal like the gods, or if gold, the basis of money and financial transactions, could be cheaply manufactured. However, most if not all of the recently available books on alchemy, including those written by a few of my personal friends in recent years, make the study and practice of alchemy seem too easy. Although informative and useful in many respects, these books gloss over the fact that for thousands of years the major alchemists have specifically stated that they always conceal one essential component, an energizing secret fire necessary for making both the medicinal stone of immortality and the stone of transmutation. Following the practice of the traditional books on alchemy, none of these books provides any useful information about the necessary energizing secret fire. In any case, I do not know of a modern student of alchemy who has made gold or lived as much as 120 years following the instructions given in the available books on alchemy. I do know of seemingly truthful stories of transmutations and even of long lives achieved with the S-tone, but these are only stories, however credible they sound. I do not dismiss these stories. I have used them as clues to understanding the underlying science. This is how I suggest other alchemical students use these stories, as stepping stones to the truth. My own experience is that I have been able to accomplish a metallic transmutation in my kitchen laboratory only twice. These were somewhat lucky replications of an experiment done by a modern scientist. They were certainly not done according to the procedures described by ancient alchemists, where you add a small amount of the philosopher's stone to molten lead in a crucible and poof, the lead is transmuted into gold. Furthermore, these successful transmutations did not involve the production of a precious metal like gold or silver. Nevertheless, they were an undeniable change of one element into another using the low energies available in my kitchen laboratory. This, of course, is an achievement that conventional modern science believes impossible without a huge and high-energy atomic reactor. Furthermore, the quantities of metal involved in these transmutations were so tiny that they did not accord with alchemical legend. Alchemy, the secret of immortality, finally revealed almost 30 years. However, those years were mostly filled with learning experiences of what not to do. Most would-be alchemists have not experienced such successes, limited as they were. Consequently, they have usually discontinued actual research after a few years. I have had the opportunity in the last 20 years to travel to many countries and visit with many former students of Paracelsus College, people who knew me as editor of the college magazine Essentia. I circumflex most of the laboratories I have seen are covered with dust and cobwebs because the students gave up trying to be laboratory alchemists and use alchemy as a philosophy and for hope. In any case, my own major intention in studying alchemy has been to make a S-tone that extends human life, not in accomplishing transmutations or in making gold. Since my successful but very limited transmutations did not seem to lead in the direction of the elixir of life, I moved on to other experiments. All of my attempts at replicating traditional experiments for making the S-tone failed for the last 25 years until the procedures and results I am reporting here in Book 1. Because of the lack of accepted experimental proof that transmutations have happened, modern science claims that alchemy is a pseudoscience, a fake and at best a forerunner, a predecessor of modern chemistry. Null. The atomic theory of modern chemistry, for example, concludes that elements such as lead or mercury cannot be changed into another metal. Of course, modern chemistry is only dealing with modifications of the electron rings of the atoms, whereas another, more basic, branch of science, modern physics, discovered a little more than 100 years ago that it was possible to smash the nucleus of an atom and thus actually change one element into another. However, the scientists who achieved this alchemical feat could only do so with the use of very high-energy generators that permitted penetrating and changing the nucleus of an atom. Since the alchemists of the Middle Ages obviously did not have access to such high-energy equipment, modern science says the claims of alchemists were clearly impossible. However, the working hypothesis I am presenting here shows that an alchemical stone can be made that extends life indefinitely without requiring the great energy of a cyclotron. The materials discussed suggest that even the goal of transmutation of metals under conditions of low energy is feasible. In Chapter 12 of Book 2, after I document the non-traditional procedures that I used for accomplishing metallic transmutations, I will briefly discuss the hypothesis of one of my mentors as to how such transmutations could happen under low-energy conditions similar to those probably used by very ancient alchemists before the secrets became lost. Also in Chapter 18 I will present a new hypothesis about the historical origins of alchemy that answers other criticisms of alchemy by modern science. I know from experience that a student can be occupied for years in making complicated extractions of the components of herbs but, despite success in making advanced herbal medicines, still fail to produce an alchemical herbal stone. I and my friends have tediously followed arcane recipes for making an animal stone. We have filled our laboratories with obnoxious smells of blood and urine. Occasionally explosions took place, but we were knowledgeable enough to protect ourselves by working behind protective screens or in a laboratory hood. This ebook, therefore, also speaks of safety in the kitchen laboratory. For years my friends and I unsuccessfully searched the old books for magical combinations of minerals that would act as if they were alive and animated. We extracted the oils of metals, turned stone-like minerals into powdered glass so we could then distill them, built furnaces, and did many other laboratory procedures to no avail. Alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed would allow a metal to grow. No one I know up to now has made the mineral S-tone. Very few could report any progress toward making any kind of alchemical S-tone. These failures took place for one main reason: these students had no concept of the secret fire that would give life to their dead potions. However, I believe that alchemy has a new future ahead of it because in this book we precisely identify the secret fire. That is one of the main messages of this book. For hundreds of years alchemy has been considered as a pseudoscience making impossible claims about turning lead into gold in a simple furnace, a magical and secret process that was said to somehow culminate in a second-stage production of an elixir of immortality. Although there have been stories told about such transmutations and of humans who consequently lived for hundreds of years, there has been little proof that any of this was more than hopeful fairy tales. No modern scientist has been able to replicate any of this, and there has not even been a reasonable scientific theory to explain why such results could possibly be obtained. I have been working at inner transformative alchemy since the 1960s and in laboratory alchemy since 1980. 27 years later, after accumulating and studying a library of 1,000 alchemical books, after completing a long course of study with one of the best-known alchemists of the 20th century, after establishing friendships with many alchemical students throughout the world, after spending many hours in my laboratory replicating the experiments of medieval alchemists, I believe I can now teach how to make the philosopher's stone that brings about an extension of human life. In the limited space of this ebook I share this knowledge as fully as I can. Please do email me with your questions. årtkúñkīñ@gmail.com. I will do the best I can to answer your questions and further your research. However, please understand that my time is limited and I may not be able to answer everyone. One of the reasons this ebook was delayed beyond its original planned date of publication is that I would stop to read and answer email instead of concentrating on writing the book. I explain here how any person with a high school education and a few $100s or less of equipment can in a short time make a form of the legendary herbal S-tone that will regenerate the human body and prevent normal aging. You can make this herbal stone in your own simple kitchen laboratory with legal substances available to anyone. Then you can use your common sense and get advice if you want from officially accredited medical authorities before ingesting what you produce. Again, I advise you to proceed with great caution. The philosopher's stone certainly will not avoid the damaging consequences of physical accidents or illnesses. If you accidentally cut off a finger or damage your brain in an auto accident or develop AIDS, the stone will not necessarily heal you or even reduce the time for healing. However, I do believe that the additional years of life that the stone provides will likely mature a person to where physical accidents and illness will be minimized. I also believe that a person wanting to reap the full advantage of life extension with the philosopher's stone will benefit from a healthy diet and learning how to positively deal with the psychological stresses of life. These are matters discussed in Book 3. I am making astonishing claims. You, the reader, have every reason to be suspicious and doubtful. So let us stop talking about alchemy and actually enter the laboratory. Alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed. Chapter 3, what is the secret fire needed to make the alchemical stone? My first drafts of this chapter started out with a list of all the things that would-be alchemists over the centuries have thought was the secret fire but was not. This list rapidly became a very, very long list. I then realized that writing about this long list of failed experiments was blocking me from making the quick, positive presentation of the secret fire that I had planned for this Book 1 manual. I then decided to put the story of these experiments that did not work into a separate chapter, as a note on the history of alchemy. This chapter is also the partial story of the curriculum students experienced at the Paracelsus Research Society in Salt Lake City. This has become Chapter 19, the secret fire is not this, not that. In Book 4. Therefore, let's jump into a quick consideration of what I believe to be the real nature of this secret fire. To do all that the philosopher's stone is said to do, The secret fire has to be a source of energy sufficient to create transmutations of elements and also to strengthen the spark of life inside our human bodies. Since we observe a multiplicity of elements wherever we look, as well as a bewildering number of forms of life from microbes to mammals, this secret fire has to be very common, as the alchemical literature suggests, and yet concealed from ordinary observation. As we shall see in Chapter 19, the problem with all the candidates for the secret fire and for the prima materia that have been named by previous alchemists is that they are not sources of energy. The salt of tartar, antimony, urine, blood, herbal tinctures prepared according to the methods of Paracelsus, etc., are not sources of energy in and of themselves. I believe these substances can have great value in making the acetone and may have medicinal value for specific problems, but something is missing, something crucial, something energetic, and when that missing energy is added to these substances names by previous alchemists, to their incomplete recipes, I believe that we then have the answer to making the acetone. To I cut to the quick, I circumflex, I have come to the conclusion that the secret fire of alchemy can be found in one of the many substances producing the natural radiations that surround us every minute of the day and are responsible for life. However, since the advent of the atomic bomb, radiation and radioactivity are words of terror, words that warn of great danger, words used by our government to inspire fear. Yet the simple fact is that we live in an actual sea of invisible radiation that our five senses are not capable of registering. Therefore, the commonly accepted theory that even the smallest amount of radiation is dangerous is obviously not true. Of course, this does not deny that certain kinds of radiation are dangerous to human life. We must tread cautiously here because there are vast gaps in scientific knowledge about radiation. I became aware of this in reading a history about the development of the first atomic bomb in the late 30s and early 40s. Just before testing the first bomb in New Mexico on July 16, 1945, some of the top scientists preparing the test were concerned that the very air on the entire planet might be set afire by using the explosive radiative force of one atom to explode nearby atoms. In other words, so little was known about radiation as recently as 60 years ago, that there were legitimate fears the A-bomb might create an endless chain reaction and destroy the world. It was the first time that anything that hot tens of millions of degrees would be on the surface of the alchemy. The secret of immortality finally revealed atmosphere would catch fire. I circumflex, from the history I under the cloud, the decades of nuclear testing. I circumflex while the pessimists were proven wrong. I have discovered in my recent study of the known upper and lower limits of radiation that beyond the so-called limits are probably undiscovered realms of matter and energy still unknown to the best of our physicists. So those of us exploring the mysterious inner geese of living matter are at the very frontier of science, at its edge. Nevertheless, enough is actually known about radiation that we can begin to understand how the secret fire of the alchemists can be discovered and put to use. For example, the sunlight we experience during the day is a radiation. Life on the planet Earth could not exist without the energy contained in sunlight. Nevertheless, it is also true that this radiation sometimes becomes so great that it very rapidly burns the human skin or interferes with useful radio and electrical transmissions. In other words, the basic truth about radiation is that it is sometimes beneficial and sometimes harmful, not that it is always harmful. I am repeating this obvious truth over and over again in a perhaps tedious manner so that you, the would-be alchemist who is considering making the legendary philosopher's stone, will not automatically reject the unfamiliar radioactive substance I am proposing here as the secret fire of alchemy. Null. Besides sunlight, our planet is also constantly being bombarded by radioactive particles and waves of energy from far-off stars. Other major components of the invisible sea of radiation constantly bathing us are the radioactive minerals and related gases underfoot everywhere we walk. These radioactive minerals are so prevalent that the government warns us when buying or selling any house to determine if that house contains dangerous levels of radioactive radon gas. However, as we shall soon learn in this book, it is possible for human beings to benefit and not be harmed by as much as 450 times the accepted government level of radiation from radon. Other useful facts about radiation: the human body itself normally contains radioactive substances absolutely essential for life such as potassium-40. I don't want to stop and discuss this here, but when you have the time, Google potassium-40 and radioactivity inside the human body for yourself. And we shall see in Chapter 4, when we discuss one of the major current theories of why aging takes place, that the very energy necessary for the functioning of every cell in any living human, animal or plant comes from outside radiation of photons of light penetrating the body. In other words, modern science has discovered that without a certain kind of invisible radiation being absorbed by your body, you stop living. You die. Ancient scientists also knew about the invisible energy systems of the physical body. That is why martial artists and students of spiritual traditions speak of chi energy, prana energy, rotating wheels of chakra energy, acupuncture energy points and meridian channels, etc. That is why the ancient Hebrews diagrammed the 10 energy centers and 22 paths of the tree of life superimposed upon an image of the human body. Rarely, however, are these concepts of so-called spiritual anatomy directly related to the sea of invisible energy found in the material universe as we are doing here. However, this relationship is clearly acknowledged by the ancients in an indirect manner by the honored place given breathing exercises by all spiritual traditions. Whenever chi or prana are mentioned, it is usually always emphasized that controlled and conscious yogic-type breath is the best way of replenishing these energies in the human body. In fact, whether you are consciously breathing or not, all the air you are taking into your alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed. Identifying here with the secret fire of the alchemists. What I am saying in this book is that there are more efficient ways of taking prana into your body than breathing. But, of course, don't stop breathing. What I am hinting at here and throughout this book is that our bodies, in fact, may not be getting enough of this secret fire through breathing and other normal contact with the invisible sea of radiation around us. We may be irradiation deficient. I circumflex this deficiency may be a primary cause of the ultimate death that everyone today expects. And, if that is true, I suggest that perhaps we can live longer and maybe forever if we consciously absorb the alchemical philosopher is stone containing a controlled amount of this secret fire. However, since the advent of the nuclear age, the common belief is that all radiation is harmful. Therefore, before we enter the laboratory to actually work with radiation, with the secret fire, let us take a closer, scientific look at radioactivity and learn all we can. What is radioactivity? It is simply an excess of the atomic energy that can be found in all substances. In non-radioactive substances, the electrons and protons, the positive and negative electrical components, are electrically balanced and the substance is stable. It is there without emitting waves or particles. Therefore, it does not affect or chemically combine with nearby atoms or molecules in radioactive substances. In contrast, there are more positive protons in the atomic nucleus as compared to the negative energy electrons in the outer rings. Radioactive atoms are not in balance. In an effort to restore its own electrical balance, waves or particles are then emitted into the environment by the substance. These emissions vary. They can, dependent on the amount of energy involved and distance, modify nearby atoms or molecules by knocking out one or more of their components or chemically combining with them. An electrically unbalanced atom or molecule is called an ion and can easily or unbalance nearby atoms or molecules. Later in this ebook it will be useful to take a closer look at the alpha and beta atomic particles emitted by radioactive substances as well as the more penetrating gamma rays and X-rays that scientists have identified. Before doing so, however, I want to note that in my research I have come across information that there may be other kinds of radiation, other kinds of particles and waves and I see that modern science is not sure it has detected and, therefore, has not named. Just to give a small example, without getting too far from the subject of this chapter, the heavy elements that are found on Earth and in the solar system are created inside our Sun from lighter elements. However, certain super-heavy elements not normally existent in our solar system are known to be created inside of suns bigger and hotter than our Sun. I have read in papers written by scientists that particles of this known earthly matter created inside other suns are sometimes carried to our planet on meteors from outer space. Scientists who then find these unknown substances become baffled by what they observe. The substances are often in such small quantities and in such constant structural change that they are like shadows that appear and disappear. Thus, if alchemy is really based on a radioactive secret fire, we may not be able to fully understand this ancient science unless we incorporate information about radiation that is at the growing edge of modern science. If that is true, maybe all we can do is observe what works even if we don't as yet have entirely good explanations for those results. So back to radiation and the definition of two words that we need to discuss: radioactivity, positive ions and negative ions. A positive ion is an atom or molecule created when one or more negatively alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed, on the other hand, exists when a negatively charged electron is gained by an atom or molecule. However, it is very important to know that ionization does not always take place within the vicinity of even a highly radioactive substance. In fact, even highly radioactive ionizing material can be shielded or kept at a sufficient distance so that it may have no or little effect on nearby substances. Also, such a substance may be sufficiently shielded or sufficient that it will affect another substance only by heating it up but not necessarily making that nearby substance radioactive. There are thus two kinds of radiation, ionizing and non-ionizing. Sunlight, we repeat, is basically non-ionizing radiation. Non-ionizing radiation does not make another substance radioactive. The heat energy emitted by the sun simply warms up the other substances it contacts. On the atomic level, this transmitted heat energy has the usually effect of increasing the movement, the illify of the electrons it contacts without knocking any out of orbit. Therefore, there is no chemical change, no creation of a new substance or no creation of a cancer cell that reproduces out of control. Again, of course, if there is too much exposure to the sun, the heat goes beyond warming and burns, a different kind of destruction involving chemical but not atomic change. Thus, to repeat ourselves again in slightly different words, a small amount of non-ionizing radiation can be useful, too much, on the other hand, can be damaging and dangerous. The waves and particles of some ionizing radiation are powerful enough to knock an electron or proton out of an atom it encounters and, thereby, also make that atom radioactive. This level of ionizing radiation creates unstable free radicals in the human body that contribute to cell death and to aging. This level of ionizing radiation creates new chemicals in places where they are unusual and not desirable. This level of radiation creates cancer cells that do not die, that multiply in place and create tumor growths that unbalance a living body. This powerful ionizing radiation is the radiation that humans must avoid or suffer harm. Note, in 1962 a famous scientist, Leonard Hayflick, discovered that living cells in the human body normally divide about 50 times and then undergo apoptosis. Circumflex. This is called the Hayflick limit. Apoptosis is a beneficial cell death where the dead cell's components putrefy and are absorbed harmlessly by, or leave, the body to be replaced by new living cells. Between 50 billion and 70 billion cells die each day due to apoptosis in the human body. For an average child between the ages of 8 and 14, approximately 20 billion to 30 billion cells die each day. In a year, this amounts to the proliferation and destruction of a mass of cells equal to an individual's body weight. Circumflex. This is quoted from a Wikipedia entry on the internet. Now, what is especially interesting about this is that cancer cells do not undergo normal apoptosis when they reach the Hayflick limit. They keep on multiplying. They are immortal. The problem is that the limitless growth of the cancer cells and the spread of these immortal cells to other parts of the body creates one growing tumor after another right in the midst of normal cells, unbalancing the organism and leading to death. So immortality is not a dream, there already are cells that are immortal. Ionizing radiation sources, if strong enough, can turn stable substances into radiating, radioactive and undesirable new chemicals. However, and this is another point that I want to underline over and over again, some ionizing radiation seems to be useful and contributes to life. In this book I am appending some carefully researched scientific studies that show this. As a matter of fact, some scientists are now saying that we live in a deficit of proper radiation and that is why we die. I will come back to this point again and again. Alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed. For example, in the next chapter I present information that National Geographic magazine and other sources have published about an old mine in Montana where people sit on lawn chairs underground up to 3 times a day for an hour each time, breathing in radon gas. This mine contains up to 450 times more radioactive radon gas than present government regulations say is healthy for people, and yet the people involved report miraculous cures not only for themselves but for their pets. In Chapter 4 I also show that the spas and baths visited by health-seeking Europeans for centuries seem to be creating cures because their water is not only saturated with sulfur but is radioactive. I present evidence that in certain areas in the world people are relatively free of cancer because of high amounts of natural radioactivity in their native soil. A scientific study I reproduce in Chapter 4 also shows that people are healthier in areas of Japan where they lived close enough to the sites of the A-bomb explosion to be exposed to more radiation than normal, but yet far enough away that normal cells did not transmute into cancer cells. These facts buttress our belief that the legendary longevity benefits of the alchemical secret fire and philosopher's stone are due to exposing the human body under controlled circumstance to the same beneficial and invisible radiation coming from natural sources. The most dangerous ionizing radiation that humans encounter is usually man-made. Dental X-rays are an example of a dangerous man-made radiation. When a person requiring dental X-rays is exposed too often, there is the danger that ordinary cells may turn cancerous during the process. The technician who X-rays patients must therefore be concerned with excessive exposure to radiation. Consequently, the technician must always wear protective clothing to protect his or her body or stand behind a shield when the radiation is being emitted from the machine. When a person requires radiation to destroy a cancerous tumor or overactive thyroid, the short-lived ionizing radioactive source is first produced in a high-energy nuclear device. Then the container in which the radioactive source is transported must be handled very carefully so as not to contaminate the medical personnel involved or kill normal cells in the patient's body. The public is occasionally warned when vials of these highly radioactive substances are lost. The uranium used to make atomic bombs is found in naturally occurring mines as the radioactive mineral pitchblende. Pitchblende contains up to 80% of uranium-235 but can still be handled by human beings for periods of time without danger. To turn pitchblende into uranium-238 or plutonium-239, the isotopes required for the bomb, requires concentrating many tons of pitchblende in a lengthy and expensive process using thousands of centrifuges. Then the uranium-238 and the plutonium-239 become highly ionized and highly dangerous to the human body. Note, isotopes are substances where the nucleus of an atom contains the same number of positively charged protons as an element normally has but has more or less neutrally charged neutrons. Therefore the isotope will be heavier or lighter than a normal atom of an element and have different physical qualities, that is, it may be radioactive. However, since the number of electrons orbiting the nucleus of an isotope are the same as the alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed. Radioactivity is everywhere. Not far from where I live there are wells filled with radioactive water that have been sealed because the government has deemed they are unsafe as sources of drinking water. If you research your own neighborhoods, there are probably such wells near where you live too. That is because the radioactive minerals contaminating such wells are to be found everywhere. Geiger counters are one instrument used to detect radioactivity. Prospectors who use Geiger counters to locate concentrated deposits of radioactive minerals have to adjust the instrument so it will not respond to the ever-present background radiation emitted by radioactive minerals. Microwave oven radiation usefully heats food. Microwave radiation extending beyond the oven is harmful to life. Again, this microwave radiation is both good and bad. Radiation is pervasive. An individual cannot avoid it. Furthermore, an individual should not avoid certain kinds of radiation. A person who always stays indoors becomes pale and weak. An individual who gets adequate sunlight glows with health. The secret fire of alchemy is a source of radiation. The conclusion I have reached from my studies is that the secret fire of alchemy that we need to make the philosopher's stone for longevity is contained in a common radioactive mineral providing a low source of energy that can regenerate and yet not harm the human body. It is my understanding, furthermore, that this same secret fire can be brought to a level of energy where it can modify the atomic nucleus of a metal and therefore achieve metallic transmutation, i.e. turn lead into gold, as the legends of alchemy state. There are several radioactive minerals that fit the criteria of the secret fire, but the information I have accumulated points to the uranium-containing mineral named pitchblende. Pitchblende is the common name for uraninite, a uranium-rich mineral with a composition that is largely UO2. Its name has been constructed from pitch, because of its black color, and blend, a term used by German miners to denote minerals whose weight suggested metal content but whose exploitation was, at the time they were named, either impossible or not economically feasible. All uraninite minerals contain a small amount of radium as a radioactive decay product. Radioactive decay, the change of one radioactive substance into another until finally a stable substance such as ordinary lead is created, occurs as protons leave the substance. This decay process, called half-life, in some substances can take thousands of years to happen. In other substances there is sometimes a half-life measured in microseconds. Some of the highest grade uranium ores in the world have been found in Canada, Australia, Germany, England, and South Africa. In the United States, large deposits of uraninite can be found in New Hampshire, Connecticut, North Carolina, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. Google the Wikipedia entry for pitchblende on the Internet. In Chapter 4 I present current scientific theories, research and statistical evidence to explain why a source of radiation like pitchblende can improve health and possibly slow or stop the aging process. In Chapter 5 I explain how small but adequate amounts of pitchblende for making the philosopher's stone can be purchased. Alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed around abandoned mines in California, and how you can locate pitchblende in your own area. In Chapter 6 I present one possible process for making the philosopher's stone using pitchblende. In Chapter 7 I explain how to own and use radioactive pitchblende safely. What are possible objections to considering the radioactive mineral pitchblende as essential for producing the philosopher's stone? The main objection to considering a radioactive mineral as the secret fire of alchemy is that modern science first discovered radioactivity in the 1890s. First there was the discovery in 1896 of X-ray radiation by Röntgen, and soon after the purification of radium by the Curies, etc. If radioactivity was not known prior to the 1890s, if the invisible radiation coming from pitchblende could not even be detected by alchemist Nicolas Flamel in the 1300s, or by alchemist Paracelsus in the 1500s, or by alchemists even further back in ancient Egypt prior to the Christian era, how could alchemists have used pitchblende to make the philosopher's stone? My full answer to this logical objection is in Chapter 18, where I discuss the origins of alchemy in ancient Sumeria. I refer the reader there, but, in order to avoid interrupting this Book 1 narrative, let me summarize that startling chapter in a few paragraphs here. When in 2004 I first began to consider pitchblende as a candidate for the secret fire, I recalled my earlier reading of the works of Zecharia Sitchin. Sitchin is a remarkable modern scholar who has come up with a startling theory to explain the huge jump in human evolution that took place at the very beginning of recorded history in Sumeria, now Afghanistan, circa 5300 BC, about 800 years before the sudden appearance of ancient Egypt and the pharaohs. Modern science claims that Homo sapiens, our human species, first evolved on this planet around 172,000 BC. However, for almost this entire period until the last 8,000 years, humans lived in tiny tribes under very primitive conditions, even though they essentially had the same brains and intelligence as we do today. But suddenly, some 8,000 years ago, with unimaginable speed, a civilization developed in the Middle East with a written language, cities, agriculture, legal system, metallurgy, pottery, etc. etc. Sitchin says that the explanation for this evolution, the rapidity of this evolution that other modern scholars find incomprehensible, is contained in the earliest writings and legends and science of Sumeria. These legends say that in the days before humans had writing there was human contact with an advanced civilization, not from outer space but from a planet of our own solar system. In his 12 books, Sitchin offers substantial scholarly proof of this strange story. Sumerian knowledge 8,000 years ago of genetic manipulations of DNA more complex than those being reported in our daily newspapers of 2008, Sumerian knowledge about outlying solar system planets, and Sumerian knowledge about ancient nuclear wars and medical use of nuclear radiation. Sitchin has even done extensive geological and archaeological ground research in the Middle East, providing such physical evidence as ancient fields of vitrified glass characteristic of nuclear explosions, landing markers for spacecraft, drawings of spacecraft and astronauts, astronomical maps of the pre-Christian era. Better than alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed. These strange legends of ancient Sumeria are not known to the general public because the Sumerian language itself was not completely translated until the mid-20th century. However, these legends about ancient nuclear wars using powerful space-based weapons and technology have their counterpart in Hindu mythology. In conclusion, until Chapter 18, at any rate, when we take a closer look at Sitchin's work, I have read everything on the internet by scholars who dispute Sitchin's research and conclusions, and I have found little that stands up to scrutiny in their arguments. The scholars who disagree with Sitchin engage in hair-splitting arguments about the meaning of Sumerian words that could be interpreted in many ways, or simply laugh at the idea that the ancients knew more than us about anything. The Sitchin critics have an entirely linear approach to the history of science, automatically assuming ancient civilizations knew less than ours about everything. On the other hand, Sitchin presents very impressive research. This research may not have been presented in acceptable academic peer-reviewed publications, as scholars would prefer, but still has a great ring of truth. I have concluded after reading Sitchin that there was an ancient knowledge about radiation and nuclear technology that was mythologized by the primitive humans who observed it from their position as slaves in ancient Sumeria, a knowledge that was preserved in a further distorted form by the priesthood in Egypt, fragmented throughout the ages by Christian Gnostics and other wisdom seekers, and, finally, appears in the alchemical tradition in reports of a few adepts who rediscovered the secret fire and applied it to metals and to the human body. I have never seen in Sitchin's books any direct references to alchemy, but to me the connection between ancient Sumeria and alchemy jumps above his pages. As soon as this ebook is published, I plan to send him a copy and hopefully get a response from him about this. Meanwhile, I recommend that readers of this ebook, particularly those who may be skeptical of a theory that an extraterrestrial contact resulted in an ancient scientific knowledge that was then lost except for legends, that they read Sitchin for themselves. I did, and then had all of my objections answered. How did I come up with the idea that a radioactive mineral was the secret fire? I wanted to acknowledge French professor of chemistry Albert Cow as the person who led me to consider that pitchblende is the basis of the secret fire. However, my thinking and experimentation have taken a different direction than his work. It has taken me 2 additional years of research from my first contact with him until I produced what I believe to be a truly functional philosopher's stone. But through Professor Cow I had a new direction and an actual name for a mineral containing the secret fire. For this I am totally grateful to Professor Cow. In July 2004 I received an email from Cow, a resident of Paris, France. In his email he gave me the address of several of his websites. After downloading and carefully reading his websites, I made extensive notes about his idea that a still undiscovered super heavy element at the very end of the periodic table with 126 protons was the basis for alchemical transmutation. The way he expresses it currently is that the super heavy element required for alchemical transmutation uses as its starting materials, uranium as the energy source and fluorine as alchemy. The secret of immortality finally revealed. Scientific shorthand to describe the atomic nucleus uses Z for the number of protons and N for the number of neutrons. I opened up a correspondence with Professor Cow. Eventually, I obtained from a European book dealer the book on alchemy published by the professor in 1995 titled La pierre philosophale, étude rationnelle de l'alchimie et philosopher's stone, a rational approach to alchemy. Although much of the book is written in the French language, many chapters are also in English. His websites are likewise written in both languages. I learned in the course of the correspondence with Professor Cow that he had become aware of me through some emails I had written as early as 1985 that have been preserved on the internet in Adam McLean's Alchemy Forum. The professor was very flattering, saying that he concluded from my emails that I was one of 2 people in the United States whom he considered to be true alchemists. Therefore, he wanted to let me know of his own original work. Incidentally, I never learned from Cow the name of the other a true alchemist. However, it was clear from the beginning of our correspondence, that Cow and I were on somewhat different research tracks. For one thing, Cow does not believe that alchemy, even with his new insights, can contribute to an extension of the human lifespan. He says flatly that the human lifespan is limited to 120 years. I circumflex. Furthermore, he comes to this conclusion not only because modern biology says this too but because of his somewhat fundamentalist Catholic reading of the Bible. Cow's interest in alchemy, therefore, is limited to what he sees as the possibility of metallic transmutation. According to Cow, insofar as I understand his work and his mathematical calculations, the super heavy element required for metallic transmutation has 126 protons. However, it is a stable, non-radioactive molecule. Cow predicts that this new still undiscovered element has the unusual feature that it becomes highly radioactive and unstable when it is heated in a crucible. Thus, if a common metal like mercury or lead is melted in a crucible and the 126C is added, a transmutation will take place just like the old alchemical texts say. Null as Cow expresses this, grave, the unique physics of the process of synthesis, of the philosopher's stone, is a synergy of nuclear reactions, a balance between endoenergetics nuclear reactions and exenergetics nuclear reactions, fusions uranium light metals. There is nothing more to say about alchemy. I circumflex. Furthermore, Cow speculates that this new she can possibly be found in nature. I have already mentioned the possibility that some hitherto unknown elements could be fused in the heat of larger suns than ours and carried to Earth by meteors. This is an idea I picked up from some scientific papers on the web, not from Cow's work. Cow seems to be saying that a few of the alchemists in the Middle Ages could have been working with this She-126C that they stumbled across in nature and that this would explain their reported transmutation successes. I have informed Cow about Th3's discovery that radiation was known to the ancients but have no idea if Cow has integrated this insight into his work. I do not see Th3's name mentioned in Cow's recent website. In Alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed with Professor Cow. See Chapter 12 in Book 2 for more on Professor Cow. Chapter 4, Why the Alchemical Secret Fire Can Slow or Stop the Aging Process. In this chapter, I want to provide some practical proof that additional radiation can benefit the human being. This will supplement my thesis that the philosopher's stone of alchemy is produced with the use of a radioactive mineral. In later editions of this book I plan to put this documentation in appendices at the end. Here, to expedite the quick publishing of this ebook, I will use a simpler but perhaps less reader-friendly procedure of summarizing the documents here and then reprinting the full documents at the end of this chapter after the summary's radiation hormesis. The first document I want to reprint here in proof of my thesis is a Japanese scientific research paper about radiation hormesis that includes some studies done on the beneficial health effects of radiation in Japan, a country where a lot of people died from the explosion of 2 atomic bombs at the end of World War II. First, here are some relevant quotes from this scientific research paper. Nulli hormesis. At a glance, all living organisms evolved and exist in a sea of ionizing radiation, much of which is internal. It is a general belief that low doses of ionizing radiation produce detrimental effects proportional to the effects produced by high-level radiation. Over the past decade, some pioneer scientists reported that low-dose ionizing radiation is not only a harmless agent but often has a beneficial or hormetic effect. That is, low-level ionizing radiation may be an essential trace energy for life, analogous to essential trace elements. It has even been suggested that about 1/3 of all cancer deaths are preventable by increasing low-dose radiation. I circumflex I grave. According to T.D. Lucky, 1/3 of all cancer deaths are premature and preventable by low-level radiation I grave. In Japan, in areas of high background radon radiation, lung cancer was about 50% of it in a low-level radon region in the above-mentioned high background radiation area. The mortality rate caused by all types of cancer was 37% lower. I circumflex I grave. Kumitori and his colleagues reported that according to their 25-year follow-up study of Japanese fishermen who were heavily contaminated by plutonium, no one died from cancer. I circumflex I grave. In a very large-scale study in USA, it was found that the mortality rate due to all malignancies was lower in states with higher annual radiation doses. I circumflex I although the entire mechanisms of radiation hormesis are not known, the following theories may explain this process. Alchemy. The secret of immortality finally revealed. I grave 2. Low doses of ionizing radiation might inhibit DNA synthesis of cells, providing a longer time for irradiated cells to recover. I circumflex I grave 3. Despite the fact that high doses of ionizing radiation are immunosuppressive, many studies have indicates that low-dose radiation may stimulate the function of the immune system. I circumflex null. European spas. For centuries, Europeans have been seeking health cures in natural hot baths. They had the belief that the water was curative because of the presence in the heated water of dissolved mineral sulfur. I have been collecting the promotional brochures of European spas and they all now say the healing effect is mainly due to the low-level radiation that heats the water. Medical insurance in Europe is paying for visits to such spas as legitimate medical treatments. On the internet, Google radioactive European spas for more information. Health mines in Montana. National Geographic for January 2004 contains an article about the Merry Widow and other mines in Montana where people are reporting health cures of themselves and their pets from sitting in an underground mine and breathing radon gas rated at 450 times higher than U.S. government health standards. Google Merry Widow Mine and see the National Geographic article and an amazing photo of the clientele sitting in lawn chairs inside the mine. At the end of this chapter I reprint an article by a writer who visited these mines. A Rosicrucian statement about radioactivity in the book A Rosicrucian Notebook, The Secret Sciences Used by Members of the Order I by Willy Schroeder, English translation, Samuel Weiser 1992. The following footnote is in the introduction. This is of interest because it is the only mention I know where radiation is acknowledged as one of the secrets of a secret metaphysical society. I quote the footnote in full here. Rejuvenated himself in 1950. As a matter of fact, with a radioactive tincture prepared from element 85, since the Rosicrucians also relied exclusively on radioactive preparations for rejuvenation, I shall pass over the other methods for restoring youth. At Mainz, Ranziger published a report on the eternal youth of alchemy. The secret of immortality finally revealed appearance of a girl of 18 and her body resisted decomposition. The presumptive cause was the radioactivity of the water. At Mittelrheinische Ranziger reported the discovery of a vein of magnetite in central Sweden which should also contain radium. Old people who exposed themselves to its radiations maintained that they felt rejuvenated. For rainwater as the Rosicrucian particularly see the Annulus Platonici in a chapter titled the Elixir of Lethe of this same Rosicrucian notebook. I circumflex footnote 1 reads, I am on the human materials taken, as a rejuvenating medicine, my inclusion, Årt Kúñkīñ, were blood, as a special juice and later fíñälly as an even more concentrated life essence, for 1 gram is the equivalent of 70 grams of the arid tincture. I see the Berlinische Monatsschrift for June 1786. These facts are taken from Eberhard Buchner's Medien, Hexen und Geistes Albert Langen, Munich 1926, paragraph 237 on page 351. I circumflex the mitochondrial theoryophageing, Wythe stone rejuvenates the body finally. Although I am just providing a summary here but not documentation, I have come to believe that the philosopher's stone creates longevity because of its influence on the mitochondria in the body. Google mitochondria on the internet if you want more scientific data on this theory. Start with Wikipedia. Every cell of every living organism contains a bacterial-like organelle called mitochondria. A cell that needs little energy for its function may only contain a few mitochondria. Other cells requiring a lot of energy may have as many as 800 mitochondria. What the mitochondria does is take in energy from photons, a light energy, a radiation that has no mass and passes through the body to reach every individual cell in its mitochondria. The mitochondria then uses this light energy to make a chemical called ATP that the cell then uses as the chemical energy source for whatever function the particular cell performs. In effect, the mitochondria is the living battery of each cell in all plants and animals. Until fairly recently, not much has been known about the mitochondria. Because of its tiny size, the mitochondria could only be seen under the huge magnification of an electron microscope, but, since the electron microscope can only observe preserved specimens, it was impossible to examine living mitochondria. However, scientists have now discovered that while the mitochondria is turning light energy into ATP, it is also using some of that light energy to create harmful free radicals, molecules that have an excess or deficiency of electrons. These ionized free radicals latch onto the electrons of other molecules to produce new chemicals that should need to be in the cell. The result is that these free radicals kill the mitochondria. Then, like a chain reaction, the whole cell itself dies because it lacks the ATP. The mitochondria are no longer reproducing when the number of living cells necessary for a life are reduced by this process to a certain minimum. The entire organism ages and dies. This is the latest theory of why aging takes place, of why the apoptosis of the entire human body takes place. I theorize that when low-level radiation is added to the mitochondria by the low-level radiation of the philosopher's stone that has been introduced into the body, the mitochondria can then resist the free radicals it produces. The mitochondria then reproduces properly. Instead, alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed, support all of its living functions for a very long time. This, I suspect, is the reason why the radiating philosopher's stone has a beneficial effect on the body and brings about longevity. This plus the other mechanisms observed by the scientists as mentioned in the radiation hormesis article below, the beneficial effect by an increased amount of low-level radiation on the DNA and the immune system, etc. The supporting documents follow, in full, an introduction to radiation hormesis by S.M. Javad Mortaza v. Biology Division, Kyoto University of Education, Kyoto 612-8522. Japan email, mortaza@kyokyu.ac.jpi. Hormesis at a glance. All living organisms evolved and exist in a sea of ionizing radiation, much of which is internal. It is a general belief that low doses of ionizing radiation produce detrimental effects proportional to the effects produced by high-level radiation. Over the past decades, however, some pioneer scientists reported that low-dose ionizing radiation is not only a harmless agent but often has a beneficial or hormetic effect. That is, low-level ionizing radiation may be an essential trace energy for life, analogous to essential trace elements. It has been even suggested that about 1/3 of all cancer deaths are preventable by increasing our low-dose radiation. Introduction. Despite the fact that high doses of ionizing radiation are detrimental, substantial data from both humans and experimental animals show that biologic functions are stimulated by low-dose radiation. The word hormesis is derived from the Greek word hormein, which means to excite. It has long been known that many popular substances such as alcohol and caffeine have mild stimulating effects in low doses but are detrimental or even lethal in high doses. In the early 1940s, C. Southam and his co-worker J. Ehrlich found that despite the fact that high concentrations of oak bark extract inhibited fungi growth, low doses of this agent stimulated fungi growth. They modified Starling's word hormone to hormesis to describe stimulation induced by low doses of agents which are harmful or even lethal at high doses. They published their findings regarding the new term hormesis in 1943. Generally, hormesis is any stimulatory or beneficial effect, induced by low doses of an agent, that cannot be predicted by the extrapolation of detrimental or lethal effects induced by high doses of the same agent. During the 1950s, Lucky, a pioneer researcher in radiation hormesis, indicated that low-dose dietary antibiotics caused a growth surge in livestock. Later he found that hormesis could be induced effectively by low doses of ionizing radiation. In 1980 the first complete report on radiation hormesis was published, Lucky TD 1980. In this report he reviewed numerous articles regarding radiation hormesis. Since the first reports, 3,000 papers have been published on the benefits of low doses of ionizing radiation. The concept of radiation hormesis is usually applied to physiological benefits from low LET radiation in the range of 1 to 50 cg total absorbed dose. It is widely believed that radiation biology in the future will be focused on biomolecular and genetic implications, problems of damage and repair, and connected problems such as radiation hormesis and radioadaptive response. Alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed. Hormesis and lumped modeling. In the early days of X-rays and radioactivity, it was generally believed that ionizing radiation has numerous beneficial effects. It was claimed that blindness might be cured by X-rays. Ladies' corsets contained radium. Drinking mineral water containing radium was very popular. People went to spas to drink radioactive water or stayed for hours in caves to be irradiated by ionizing radiation. For a review see Wolf 1992. Between 1925 and 1930 over 400,000 bottles of distilled water containing radium-226 and radium-228 were sold. It was advertised that some mixtures could treat over 150 diseases, especially lassitude and sexually impotence. It is estimated that the collective skeletal radiation dose of victims of such radioactive medicine may had exceeded 350 sieverts by the time the user died. Gradually people found that the improper use of ionizing radiation could lead to many complications and harmful effects. Later, in 1927 Hermann J. Muller, a Nobel Prize winner, found that X-rays are mutagen and there is a linear relationship between mutation rate and dose. He proposed that mutations, which are induced by radiation, or other mutagens, are mostly detrimental. When it was generally accepted that excessive radiation may be harmful, the first regulations for dose limits were introduced. Despite carcinogenicity of X-rays was observed as early as 1902, the first radiation protection limits suggested in 1925, and for 3 decades these limits were based on the concept of a tolerance dose. Surprisingly, until the end of World War II, ionizing radiation was considered a great scientific miracle. After the war, the development of nuclear weapons and later increased use of nuclear power changed this great miracle into radiophobia. At that time people became afraid of even very small doses of ionizing radiation. After the atomic bomb explosions in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, studies concerning lifespan of atomic bomb survivors showed a linear relationship between cancer mortality and high doses of radiation. The United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation then proposed the linear no-threshold theory in 1958. According to LN theory, the effects of low doses of ionizing radiation can be estimated by linear extrapolation from effects observed by linear extrapolation from effects observed by high doses. 2. There is not any safe dose because even very low doses of ionizing radiation produce some biological FFECT. In 1959 the International Commission on Radiation Protection adopted the LN theory. The results of many investigations do not support the LNT theory. Furthermore, several studies including Cohen's studies of the relationship between environmental radon concentrations and lung cancer even contradict this theory and clearly suggest a hormetic FFECT. This contradictory evidence is discussed in the following section. Extensive evidence suggesting hormesis. Grave 1. Experimental evidence 1.1. Cancer prevention of Adorchargi in 1996 showed that when the mice pre-irradiated with just adapting doses of 1 centigrade a for 5 days, thymic lymphoma was induced in 16% of the animals. Interestingly, when pre-irradiated mice were exposed to a 2 gray challenge dose, thymic lymphoma was induced again in 16% of the animals. However, the challenge dose alone induced thymic lymphoma in 46% of the mice. From these results, it can be concluded that the low-dose pre-irradiation possibly cancel the induction of thymic lymphoma by the 2 gray challenge dose. In 1996, Azam and his colleagues showed that a single exposure of Ch10T12 cells to doses as low as 0.1 centigrades reduces the risk of neoplastic transformations. They sug alchemy. The Secret of Immortality finally revealed. Redpath and his co-workers have confirmed the findings of Azam and his co-workers. To test the generality of the observations of Azam and his colleagues, they used the HeLa-X skin fibroblast human hybrid cell. Using a similar experimental protocol, they demonstrated a significantly reduced transformation frequency for adapted to unirradiated cells. In addition, recently Mitchell and his co-workers in Canada have indicated that a low-dose pre-irradiation, 10 centigrays, half a gray height, modifies latency for radiation-induced myeloid leukemia in CBAH mice after exposure to a 1 gray chronic radiation exposure. They showed that the latent period for development of acute myeloid leukemia was significantly increased by the prior low radiation dose. Interestingly, according to D.D. Lucky, 1/3 of all cancer deaths are premature and preventable by low-level ionizing radiation. Grave 1. 2. Survival rate. In 1996, Yanezawa and his colleagues indicated that when 21 ICR mice were exposed to 8 grays of X-rays, about 30% of the animals survived 30 days after the irradiation. However, when mice pre-irradiated with 5 centigrays of X-rays, the survival rate increased to about 70%. Ywanzawa et al. 1996. Grave 2. Epidemiological evidence. Alpha-radiation hormesis data are still incomplete. Extensive epidemiological studies have indicated that radiation hormesis really exists. A brief review on this irrefutable evidence is as follows. 2.1 Japanese studies. Grave 1. According to Unscare report, among A-bomb survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki who received doses lower than 200 millisieverts, there was no increase in the number of total cancer death. Mortality caused by leukemia was even lower in this population at doses below 100 millisieverts than age-matched control cohorts. r3vèàlēd Mifune and his co-workers indicated that in a spa area, with an average indoor radon level of 35 becquerels m3, the lung cancer incidence was about 50% of that in a low-level radon region. Their results also showed that in the above-mentioned high background radiation area, the mortality rate caused by all types of cancer was 37% lower null r3 according to Mine et al. Among A-bomb survivors from Nagasaki, in some age categories, the observed annual rate of death is less than what is statistically expected. r3 Kumatori and his colleagues reported that according to their 25-year follow-up study of Japanese fishermen who were heavily contaminated by plutonium, no one died from cancer. r3 2.2. Background radiation studies r3 In an Indian study, it was observed that in areas with a high background radiation level, the incidence of cancer and also the mortality rate due to cancer was significantly less than similar areas with a low back alchemy. The secret of immortality finally revealed r3 in a very large-scale study in USA. It was found that the mortality rate due to all malignancies was lower in states with higher annual radiation dose null r3 In a large-scale Chinese study, it was showed that the mortality rate due to cancer was lower in an area with a relatively high background radiation, while the control group, 78,000 people, who lived in an area with low background radiation had a higher rate of mortality, WAL 1990. In the USA, it was indicated that significantly, the total cancer mortality is inversely correlated with background radiation dose r3 2.3. Nuclear power plant studies r3 In a Canadian survey, the mortality caused by cancer at nuclear power plants was 58% lower than the national average r3 2 in UK. Also, it was indicated that cancer frequency among nuclear power plant workers was lower than the national average. The mechanism of hormetic phenomena although still we do not know the entire mechanisms of radiation hormesis, the following theories may explain this process. r3 DNA repair. According to this theory, low doses of ionizing radiation induce the production of special proteins that are involved in DNA repair processes. Studies using two-dimensional gel electrophoresis indicated new proteins in cells irradiated with low doses of radiation. Also, it was further shown that cyclohexamide, a protein synthesis inhibitor, blocks this hormetic FFECT. The function and importance of these radiation-induced proteins is still unknown. Also, it was found that inhibitors of poly-A-D-ribose polymerase, an enzyme implicated in DNA strand break rejoining, could prevent the induction of adaptive response r3 free radical detoxification. In 1987, Fein Deng and his co-workers indicated that low doses of ionizing radiation cause a temporary inhibition in DNA synthesis. This temporary inhibition of DNA synthesis would provide a longer time for irradiated cells to recover. This inhibition also may induce the production of free radical scavengers, so irradiated cells would be more resistant to any further exposures. r3 stimulation of immune system. Despite the fact that high doses of ionizing radiation are immunosuppressive, many studies have indicated that low doses radiation may stimulate the function of the immune system. In 1909, Russ first showed that mice treated with low-level radiation were more resistant against bacterial disease. Later in 1982, Lucky published a large collection of references supporting immunostimulatory effects of low doses of ionizing radiation, Lucky TD 1982. Conclusion: Alchemy, the secret of immortality finally revealed. Your radiation protection policy is based on linear extrapolation from the dose-response data of high doses of ionizing radiation. According to the results of many worldwide studies, this assumption is not compatible with observed health effects of low levels of radiation. Obviously, LNT and current radiation protection regulations exaggerate the risk of low-level ionizing radiation and cause radiophobia, YLORS 1990. It is concluded that according to new findings, the existence of radiation hormesis and adaptive response are not deniable, and abandoning the LNT theory and low-dose risk estimations will be a real necessity in the near future. References: Eobat, J. D., Hamilton, T. R. and Weeks, J. L. Epidemiological Studies and th3 corporations covering the Canadian nuclear fuel cycle, biological effects of low-level radiation, IAEA, Vienna, 351. IASMEI, low-dose ionizing radiation decreases the frequency of neoplastic transformation to a level below the spontaneous rate in CHA-10T12 cells. Radiation Research, Volume 146, No. 4, pp. 369-73. Avatarcharge ed. Role of radioadaptation on radiation-induced thymic lymphoma in mice. Mutation Research, 358, 231-235. Bruce M., Radiation Hormesis After 85 Years, Health Physics Society Newsletter. I. Cohen, B. L., Relationship between exposure to radon and various types of cancer, Health Physics, Volume 65, Number 5, pages 529. Cohen B. L. Test of the Linear No-Threshold Theory of Radiation-Induced Cancer, presented at the Annual Congress of the South African Radiation Protection Association, Kruger National Park, South Africa. I. Fijnendigen, L. E. Mulspan, H. Bond, V. P. Sunhouse, C. A. Intracellular Stimulation of Biochemical Control Mechanisms, Health Physics, Vol. 52, pp. 663-669, 1987. Ifrigerio, N. A. and Stowe, R. S. Carcinogenic and Genetic Hazard from Background Radiation, Biological and Environmental Effects of Low-Level Radiation, IAEA, Vienna, Volume 2, pp. 385-393, 1976. E-Corp, Recommendations of the International Commission on Radiological Protection, Publication No. 1, Pergamine Press, London. Ikushima, T. Aratomi, H. and Morzita, J. Radioadaptive Response, Efficient Repair of Radiation-Induced DNA Damage in Adapted Cells, Mutation Research, Vol. 358, pp. 193-198. Jaworowski Z. Beneficial Effects of Radiation and Regulatory Policy, Australian Physical and Engineering Sciences in Medicine, Volume 20, No. 3. Catherine R. L. Radiation Protection, Medical Physics Handbook 16. Catherine R. L. Pathway to a Paradigm, The Linear 9-Threshold Dose Response Model in Historical Context, The Alchemy, The Secret of Immortality finally revealed.